Chapter 9 focuses on the dynamics of interpersonal relationships. There is a lot of sticky terminology in this chapter, so we're going to talk through this and get us all on the same page moving forward. What makes a relationship? Our textbook says that closeness, influence, commitment, and intimacy. It's all a sincere process by which two or more people share that experience. Relationships aren't just a one-way street. They can have more of a dominant partner, but it does take two people to engage and create a relationship. That relationship could be a surface acquaintance, or it could be someone that you know enough just to say hi. Or it could be something much deeper to some degree, and it does include all these characteristics. When we talk about influence, this means how someone can sway your opinion, what weight they bear on the decisions you make, and commitment means you're committing to being engaged with that person. So why do we form relationships? Our textbook has a list of 7 characteristics, the first being appearance. Even though we try not to be superficial, the reality is we very much judge each other by the way we look, because it's our first impression. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're judging their beauty or whether or not they wear the right clothes and all the other things that make up what we see when we view the other person for the first time. But we also look at their disposition or their demeanor. Are they the type of person who smiles a lot, or do they frown a lot? All of these form a person's appearance, which also forms our first impression. We also form relationships based on similarity. These are people who have similar values. They could come from the same race or culture or the same socioeconomic background. In high school, maybe they were all part of the same clique or group based off of their parents' values or what their careers were. Like maybe all the doctors' children hung out together. Or maybe the children who are all struggling financially hung out together because they can't afford to do the same things that other groups could. Maybe all the pro-gun people hung out together. These similar values and beliefs, whether they're based off of economics or religion or any of these reasons, they all help us to form those bonds and create relationships with one another. Another reason why people form relationships is because their characteristics complement each other. Maybe you've heard the phrase, opposites attract. There's an idea that if people are too similar, then they won't get along. But studies have examined successful and unsuccessful couples over a 20-year period that show interactions between both similarities and the differences. Our textbook explains that when partners are radically different, the dissimilar qualities that first appear intriguing later become cause for relational breakups. So what this is saying is that if I'm truly fascinated with someone based on how different they are, those differences can't always carry into a long-term relationship. Those differences can be something that affects our relationship negatively because it's not something that we can understand. Many relationships are based on rewards. Our textbook talks about the economic model, which is also called the social exchange theory. And this approach suggests that we often seek out people who can give us rewards that are greater than or equal to the costs in dealing with them. So we often think about intrinsic rewards when we have a friendship. Those are the rewards we get just by being with the other person. Maybe they're a cheerleader for your life goals, or someone that you share common interests with, or someone that you just love hanging out with. But think about what rewards you get out of certain relationships. It doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. It could just be a strong friendship. I'm going to skip ahead on rewards, and I'll come back to that slide later. But I do want to talk about comparison level. The comparison level is a minimum standard of acceptable behavior in a partner. So these are the minimum standards you have when seeking someone to hang out with, which could be a friend or a significant other, or in some situations, family members that you choose to be seen in public or associate with. So think about this. What are your minimum standards in acceptable behavior? And this varies from person to person based on many random situations. For example, good hygiene is something that's very important to me. I was once talking to this girl on Instagram who I thought was the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. And when we finally went out and the night came to a close and it came for that moment when we were about to kiss, she had the worst breath I have ever smelled on a person, and it totally turned me off. Another good standard of behavior is probably good manners. So someone that just treats everyone with respect. On another date, another random person, I was out with this person and she was incredibly rude to the wait staff. And as someone who was a waiter, that was unacceptable for me. So those tiny little things are minimum standards of acceptable behavior for me. The comparison level alternatives are where you're going to evaluate the rewards you have with that person and the expected potential in other relationships. If you look at divorce, for example, sometimes people say that they marry up. Maybe they marry someone who makes more money or someone who has a bigger family. There's many different reasons why people marry up or choose different friend circles. If you're friends in high school with a small clique of people and you want to join a different clique where you have more friends and more opportunities to engage in extracurricular activities, these are all comparison level alternatives where you look at what it is you have right now and maybe what more can you have, or what would I be giving up if I left one friend to be friends with another person? In addition to rewards, we also choose our relationships based off competencies. We want to be with people who are competent, whether they have career skills, hobbies, interests, and other talents, things that people are good at so that hopefully their talents will rub off on us. We're attracted to competent people, especially when they have warm rather than cold personalities. We want to be around people who are inviting and exciting. There are many talented people in the world, but not all of them are open to sharing their talents and their abilities. Up next, we have proximity, and proximity simply states that we form relationships with people with whom we frequently interact. For example, we're more likely to develop friends with people who are close to us, like our neighbors. These are people who you don't mind knocking on their door and asking if you can borrow a cup of sugar. Or maybe you might ask them to watch your dog or house sit for you for the weekend when you're gone on a vacation. It's just easier to make friends with people who are near us. Now, of course, we can make friends on social media with the World Wide Web, but in real life, relationships are often based off of proximity. It can also be people that we work with, people who are friends of friends, or people who just hang out in the same places as us. These are all relationships that are based off of proximity. Finally, we form relationships based on disclosure. Again, this refers back to Chapter 1 when we learned about self-disclosure, which increases liking of others because it involves sharing private information and building respect and trust. Another important ingredient in successful self-disclosure is timing. It's not necessarily wise to talk about your sexual insecurities or other things that can be seen as TMI or too much information. You need to understand that there is an appropriate time and place, which links right back to competent communication. It needs to be both effective as well as appropriate, and that self-disclosure piece always needs to measure what is or is not appropriate. Relational maintenance simply explains the communication that is aimed at keeping relationships operating smoothly and satisfactorily. If we ignore our friends, they're not going to stay our friends for very long. Relationships of any kind take some degree of work. Even if we're just keeping up a strong relationship with our teller at the bank, that involves asking them maybe how their day was, how the kids are, chit-chatting about the weather. There is still communication involved in maintaining these relationships. Mark Knapp created 10 stages of relational development. These include 4 stages of coming together, 4 stages of coming apart, and the plateau that is the relational maintenance in between. We're going to begin with coming together, which includes the initiation step. During the initiation stage, we're showing others that we're interested in making contact or in some way demonstrating that we are a person worth talking to. If we hang our head all the time and kick rocks all day, we're not showing any interest in becoming friends with anyone. We need to say hi, get out of our comfort zone, make eye contact, engage people in conversation, and share our interests. We need to share all those reasons that we form relationships in the first place. We need to share something interesting about ourselves that someone may want to learn. We might want to reveal things that show someone that they would get rewards in a relationship with us. When we start the initiation stage, we're developing all those first initial self-disclosure pieces that intrigue someone to want to be our friend. It also opens the door for us to find out more about them because communication is 2 ways. And it should be, because we shouldn't just be talking about ourselves. We should be learning about the other person that we're engaging with. The next stage is experimentation. Experimenting is the hallmark of small talk because it serves several functions. Our textbook says that first, it's a useful way to find out what shared interests you have with that person. It's also a way for you to audition the other person, and it's a way for them to figure out if you have enough rewards. It's also a way for them to figure out whether or not you're interesting enough to be friends with. So this is just taking the initiation stage to that next level. The third stage of coming together is intensifying. This is the type of stage in a relationship where if it's a close friend, we're probably already comfortable with saying things like, I love you. You may be expressing things non-verbally through hugging or kissing or more intimate contact. The intensifying stage is usually a time of euphoria for many people. This is where you may get super excited to see each other and you can't get enough of each other, and you're really sad when you see each other go. If you're in a romantic relationship, you may daydream or get distracted a lot, and all these things are the intensifying stage of a relationship. Following the intensifying stage, we get to the integrating stage of a relationship. This is a stage where two people become a singular social unit. Maybe you're old enough to remember when Jennifer Garner and Ben Affleck were a couple. Most media outlets referred to them as Benifer. They just became one name. So this is the part of a relationship where you're with someone so much where if the other person is missing, everyone's wondering where the other person is. Some people get to the intensifying stage and then they become inseparable. And the integrating stage is where we decide that this is the accepted status quo. Our textbook also talks about how this is the social media Facebook status, where you become Facebook official. And this isn't so much the case with normal friendships because it's no big deal just to add another person to social media. But when you change your relationship status, well, that's often a big part of the integrating phase of coming together. Then we get to the bonding stage. The bonding stage is thoroughly within the relational maintenance part of the diagram. This is the first part of the plateau, and in the bonding stage, partners may make symbolic or public gestures to show the world that their relationship is real. This is their public commitment. Sometimes this includes things like getting engaged or getting married. People sometimes move in together, or if they're from a different culture, or they're maybe even in different relationships, they might make a written or verbal pledge to one another. Maybe best friends get tattoos of one another, but in some way there's a bonding experience that goes on. Our textbook also talks about how these relationships don't have to be romantic in order to achieve bonding. For instance, if two authors are writing a book together, or students being initiated into a sorority or college team, there's always going to have some bonding rituals involved. And they usually mark an important turning point in these relationships. Usually, with new students and roommates, you can be strangers, but when you move in from different towns, at some point you bond, and you can remember that specific point where this is the day where this person became my friend. So it's more than they were just my roommate, now they're your friend. On the other side of the plateau, from bonding, we have the differentiating phase of relational development. This development usually shows up in a couple's pronoun usage. Instead of talking about us and we, it becomes me. Instead of, what are we doing this weekend? It's, I'm going to go off-roading this weekend. So it's that shift from trying to redefine your individuality. Sometimes in the coming together phase, people lose sight of themselves. Maybe they lose sight of their own goals or a hobby that they had once, and this new relationship or friendship is taking the place of that hobby. In the differentiating phase, it's kind of like taking a step back. It's time for you to say, I love hanging out with this person, and you might want them to be a part of your life, but I'm going to do what I want to do. Maybe you've neglected other friendships that you need to serve some maintenance on. This is the time that they can do that in the differentiating phase. Differentiating is not always negative. It can be very positive because we need to have our own individual identity. We need to have our own lives in addition to the life as a person in a relational unit. We can maintain our families and maintain other friendships, and the key to successful differentiation is maintaining commitment to the relationship. It's finding that perfect balance. If you don't have a good balance and you can't be an individual within a strong relationship, then we get to the circumscribing stage. In the circumscribing stage, partners reduce the scope of their contact. They're not just taking a step back, now they're taking two. Now they might be moving out, they might be filing for divorce, or disconnecting themselves, or changing their relationship status back to single. This is where they decide that maybe this relationship isn't healthy, or it's just not as fun as it once was for whatever reason. They're definitely taking a huge step back in the circumscribing stage. And if it continues to crumble, instead of going back to bonding, we have stagnation. This is where a relationship is a hollow shell of its former self, according to your textbook. We see stagnation in many workers who have lost enthusiasm for their job, just like people get bored at work or bored with the whole run-of-the-mill, I do this every day kind of a job. You can get that same feeling in a relationship. Maybe people just aren't as fun as they once were, or you're no longer attracted to them. And this also links back to the reasons why we form relationships in the first place. If somebody was complimentary because they had all these fascinating things about them and they're not fascinating anymore, then it's stagnant and you don't want to hang out with them. Maybe someone may become bored with you, or they might be bored of all the hobbies that you used to do together. People have lost interest and you don't have those shared events that you want to partake in anymore. Stagnation leads to avoiding, and you might do it directly or indirectly. You may do it indirectly by just saying, look, I'm just too busy to hang out, or you might just be direct and say, look, just don't call me anymore. I don't want to talk to you anymore. Our textbook reveals that there are several ways to gain distance. One is by expressing detachment. This is avoiding the other person altogether, leaving the room, ignoring questions, ignoring text messages. A second technique is showing antagonism. And this is where you behave hostile towards the other person and just thinking of them to be lesser or not giving them the respect that another person needs. Another strategy is to be mentally disassociated by the person. This is just thinking about the other person in a really negative way. This would be where you probably completely lose respect for that other person. And finally, we get to the terminating stage of the relationship. In a marriage, this would be the final divorce stage. It would be moving out. If you live with someone, deleting them as a contact from your phone, deleting them from social media. This is where the relationship or friendship has completely ended. And these are the 10 stages of relational development. From here, we get into dialectical tensions. These are conflicts that can arise when two opposing or incompatible forces exist simultaneously. If you look at Table 9.1 on page 273 of the 14th edition of your textbook, it shares in the column on the left internal manifestations and external manifestations. And at the top are different opposing forces. The first is integration versus separation, then stability versus change, and expression versus privacy. We're going to get to each one of these three in much more depth. During the integration versus separation, the conflict is a desire between connection and interdependence. This is very frequent if you go from the bonding stage into the differentiation stage. In this stage, you're a couple and you're noticed as a couple. You do everything together, but you're taking that little step back to find yourself again. Embodied into the integration and separation dialect is a set of apparently contradictory needs, which creates communication challenges that can show up both within a relationship and when relational units or partners face the world. So these can be private or public displays. It could be maybe going to a baseball game and one person really wants a hot dog, even though they both decided to go vegan. But one person really misses hot dogs and they want to get a hot dog. So they can be little things that grow into much larger things, which could be interests or careers or educational goals. But here you're having that internal struggle on whether or not you would like to fully integrate into the relationship or step back and retain more independence. If you read the example of porcupines in your textbook, it says that they need to huddle together for warmth, but they're prickly, so their spines poke each other, so they move away. But they get cold, so they come back together again. This basically means that we need each other to feel like we're not alone in the world, but we also need to keep our distance from each other in order to preserve our independence. This is what's happening during the integration-separation dialectic. The struggle also shows up in the connection-autonomy dialect when we want to be close to others, but at the same time we're seeking independence. One of the most common reasons why people break up is because they don't feel connected to one another. Maybe one person doesn't satisfy our needs for connection, or perhaps someone is overbearing and has excessive needs for connection. Our mobile devices can create a lot of tension within the connection-autonomy dialectic. On the one hand, mobile devices are excellent for building intimacy, but at the same time, people can text you too much, which can make someone feel like they're being smothered to death. These tensions don't just occur in romantic relationships. This can also happen with family members who maybe expect you to always be available via cell phone, even though you might need some space from them. Within the integration versus separation dialectic, we also have the inclusion-seclusion dialectic. And this is the tension between integration and separation that operates externally when people within a relationship struggle to meet competing needs. They might struggle to reconcile a desire for involvement with the outside world with the desire to live their own lives free of what can feel like interference with others. The example in our textbook is, at the end of a busy week, a couple might receive an invitation to go to a party. Do they decline the invitation or do they go to the party? The decision they have to make is if they go to the party, they may be sacrificing the chance to spend quality time with one another. But if they decline the invitation, they risk losing contact with important friends. This can also happen within close-knit families. Maybe during the holidays you're expected to have dinner with your in-laws and your extended family, but at the same time you want to create your own traditions within your immediate family. So this is how people manage their time and negotiate their time that they spend together. From here we move to stability versus change. This acknowledges that stability is important in a relationship, but at the same time too much of it can make the relationship feel very stale. You'll also find the predictability and novelty dialect, which captures another set of tensions. Nobody wants a completely unpredictable partner, but at the same time you want someone who keeps life interesting. The example in our textbook is that after a decade of marriage, you might know each other too well. This might come in handy in certain situations, but at the same time, it tends to lower the passion level in a relationship. At the external level, the conventionality and uniqueness dialectic captures the challenges that people in a relationship face when trying to meet each other's expectations as well as their own. This occurs when people in a relationship want to meet each other's expectations, but at the same time they want to be true to themselves. Sometimes people want to break away from the expectations that others hold of them. For example, if you just had a fight with your partner in the car on the way to the party, it can be a burden to pretend like you're just a happy couple when there's tension between the two of you. In the expression versus privacy dialectic, the disclosure is one characteristic of interpersonal relationships along with the drive for intimacy. We have an equally important need to maintain some space between ourselves and other people. The internal struggle between expression and privacy shows up in the openness and closeness dialectic. For example, what do you do if you're in an intimate relationship with a person that you care about who asks you an important question that you don't want to answer? For example, questions like, do you think I'm attractive? You might think that honesty is the best policy, but at the same time, you don't want to hurt your partner's feelings. You might say that you tell your partner everything and there's no secrets between you, but that's likely an overstatement because smart communicators make choices about what they will and will not share with their partner. And the same conflicts can exist in openness and privacy externally in the revelation concealment dialectic. For example, if you and a longtime fellow coworker haven't been getting along, do you answer the boss's question of how's it going honestly, or do you keep the disagreement to yourself? This can also be true in same-sex relationships and friendships as well. Are people going to feel hurt if you're friends with someone like an ex who's now a friend? Or maybe there's a family member who might not like someone that you're dating. In a revelation concealment dialectic, as well as the openness-closeness dialectic, also think about how you portray yourself in social media. What kind of image are you portraying? Are you being honest? Remember, honesty is a very important part. But if you're in a same-sex relationship, are you okay with going public with that information? And also, what kind of tensions are related to concealing versus revealing? Next, we're going to discuss some strategies for managing these dialectical tensions. And as I'm talking about these things, you may want to think about which ones you use and how effective they are. The first strategy is denial. This is just pretending that problems don't exist. The example in our textbook talks about a situation of stability versus novelty. People are often going to choose the path of least resistance. They might avoid bringing up things that are bothering them, any conflicts that they might have, in order to maintain the relationship. As you might expect, this isn't likely to be a satisfactory approach. Compromising is another approach. For example, a couple that is caught between the conflicting desires of novelty versus predictability might settle for a lifestyle that isn't as predictable as one wants or as surprise-filled as the other one may seek. Alteration discusses a strategy where people may attempt to diffuse tensions by alternating, meaning they choose one end of the dialectical spectrum on some occasions and the other end at different occasions. For example, some friends might manage the connection-autonomy dialectic by alternating between spending large amounts of time together and other periods when they live their independent lives. Or they might compartmentalize parts of their relationship. The example in your textbook discusses a couple that might manage the openness-closeness dialectic by sharing almost all of their feelings about mutual friends with one another, but keeping certain parts of their romantic histories private. They can be very open about friendships, but they might have a history that might hurt the other person's feelings, so they keep that private to maintain the relationship. Your textbook says that a more rewarding approach may be acceptance. For example, your text says that a couple who accepts both the needs for predictability and novelty might devise a predictably novel approach. Maybe there's a couple that does something once a week that they've never done before to keep the novelty and to keep the spark alive. Reframing is another constructive way to manage opposing desires. Maybe you have a partner who is unwilling to share certain parts of their past. Rather than thinking that this person is keeping secrets, you can reframe the situation in your mind by thinking that this mysteriousness is kind of attractive. After all, a little bit of mystery is kind of hot. Reaffirmation is the approach that acknowledges that dialectical tensions will never disappear. So instead of trying to make them go away, reaffirmers accept the challenges they present. Our textbook says that one may want to view relationships as a roller coaster and to view dialectical tensions as just being part of the ride. Every relationship has arguments, they have misunderstandings and miscommunications. We tend to hurt our partner's feelings intentionally or not. And by admitting these things, it doesn't mean that we're saying that we're valid or right when we do these things, or that we're trying to create negative outcomes. We're just admitting that this is part of life and part of being in a relationship. We take this approach to learn and grow from them rather than to ignore them and pretend that they don't exist. Next, we're going to talk about communication about relationships. The big word this week is meta-communication, which simply refers to communication that talks about other communication, or what your textbook defines as messages that refer to other messages. Examples in our textbook describe when you're in an argument and you say something like, "I wish we could stop arguing so much." Or if you have someone who's revealed something, you can say, "I really appreciate how honest you've been with me." This is commenting about a person's approach to communication. This can be verbal and nonverbal communication. If someone says something to you and you roll your eyes at them, you're telling them how you feel about whatever message they just delivered to you. There are many different ways to maintain and support your different relationships, and the first one your textbook gives is positivity. It's important to keep relational climate polite and upbeat and to avoid criticism. If you do have to give criticism, even negative criticism, make sure it's done constructively. The second is openness. This is speaking directly about the nature of a relationship and disclosing personal needs and concerns. This includes meta-communication, and it's something that we're not very comfortable with. Our textbook says that 90% of people are not completely comfortable having conversations about their relationship. We're uncomfortable talking about how we feel and what we need at times. The third is assurances. This is letting the other person know, both verbally and non-verbally, that he or she matters to you and that you're in a committed relationship. You're assuring them. The fourth is social networks. Social networks doesn't necessarily mean social media. It could be attending to each other's friends and family and loved ones. When you're in a committed relationship, if it's a significant other or if it's a friendship, you build friendships with the friends that they've had before you. You become part of the family that you're a part of. You have things like adopted moms and aunts and uncles. If you get married, you have in-laws, you have new aunts and uncles, brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews. You become part of a much larger interconnected network. The fifth is sharing tasks. This is simply helping one another take care of life's chores and obligations. This can be something as simple as doing the laundry or watering the garden, taking out the trash, going to the grocery store and shopping together. It's taking an individual who does everything solo into a couple that's part of a team. Social support is about helping others during challenging times. It provides emotional support when people are stressed or grieving, or just having a bad day, or even if they're really happy. Emotional support is not always somebody who needs something because they're sad. Sometimes you need someone to share in your joy and celebration of all the good things that are happening to you. It's very important to keep messages and emotional support person-centered. That means they focus the emotions on the speaker rather than shifting to your own feelings. And don't minimize their feelings. This is giving the attention necessary to a friend in need of a listening ear. Informational support is when you need helpful resources. They can give us recommendations about shopping, maybe legal advice, or observations about our blind spots. This could be a friend or a teacher looking over your resume for you, or you might have a friend proofread an essay before you hand it in. These are all examples of informational support. Instrumental support is support given by rolling up your sleeves and doing a task or a favor to show that you care. This can be as simple as giving someone a ride to an airport or caregiving for someone who's really ill. We count on our loved ones to offer assistance in our times of need, and this is what instrumental support is. Social support is about helping others during challenging times by providing emotional, informational, or instrumental resources. Next, we'll talk about repairing damaged relationships. Our textbook talks about 4 different types of transgressions, which is when one partner violates the explicit or implicit terms of the relationship. The first is minor versus significant. Things like lack of commitment, distance, disrespect, problematic emotions, and aggressions. These are all different ways that we can damage one another or damage our relationships or how we feel about one another. In the minor versus significant transgression, they often can actually aid in relationship balance. A little distance can make the heart grow fonder, a little jealousy can be a sign of affection, and a little anger can start the process of resolving a gripe. But in large and regular doses, these acts can become transgressions that can damage trust, can damage respect, relational value, and the perceiver's communication competence can be perceived as being very low. This also increases rumination, and the personal closeness can decrease, and people don't want to be around each other anymore. In social versus relational transgressions, social rules are shared by society at large. For example, almost everyone would agree that ridiculing or humiliating a friend or a family member is a violation of fundamental social rules. We want to be respectful and save face for ourselves and other people. Other rules are relational in nature. These are unique norms constructed by people involved. The example in your textbook states that some families have a rule saying that if I'm going to be a little bit late, I'll let you know so you don't worry. When such a rule exists, failing to honor these rules is a violation, and this causes issues with trust and disrespect as well. Deliberate versus unintentional transgressions. Oftentimes, unintentional transgressions could be something that you just didn't mean to do. You do it when you lash out of anger, maybe you had a really bad day, or something slipped your mind, maybe you forgot something. These are all unintentional. But in fits of anger, if you purposely lash out, or if you make mean or cruel comments and you attempt to hurt people's feelings, these are deliberate types of transgressions. Finally, we have one-time versus incremental. The most obvious transgressions occur in a single episode, whether it's someone cheating on someone else, or someone said something that they shouldn't have, or they slammed the door and they stormed out of the house in anger, or they hung up on someone. But more subtle transgressions are incremental, meaning they occur multiple times over time. Think about emotional withdrawal, for example. People have times when they retreat into themselves, and we usually give one another space to do that. But if the withdrawal becomes pervasive, it can be a violation of the fundamental rule. In most relationships, those partners need to be available to one another. Everyone needs to have a little bit of me time, but if that me time becomes all the time, then you may be looking at someone who's pulling away from the relationship, or you may need to step in and be that instrumental friend that helps them get out of whatever situation that they're in. But long-term withdrawal is a violation of relationship fundamentals. Some types of relational transgressions include lack of commitment. This is a failure to honor important obligations. It could be being dishonest or unfaithful. Distance is physical separation as well as psychological separation. This can be not responding to texts or not coming over when you say you're going to, or any kind of distance you put between yourself and another person. Disrespect can be criticism. It can be name-calling or any type of verbal or physical abuse. Could be verbal, nonverbal, or on social media. Problematic emotions include things like being jealous all the time, unreasonably suspicious, angry, or raging. And then we have aggression, which I think also falls under disrespect. Verbal hostility, physical violence, even rape can be a form of aggression, depending on where it falls within the relationship. Finally, we have strategies for relational repair. Sometimes we need to forgive each other or get over a fight or admit that we've done something wrong. Sometimes we need to talk about the problem, admit that we've done something wrong, and find a way to move forward. Sometimes this involves requesting clarification. If we had a fight, we need to talk it through and say, how did you feel about what I did? Or maybe the other person is requesting an apology, and maybe it's sincere and maybe it's not. We're always evaluating for genuine regret. Are we going to get a sincere apology from this person? Or maybe you're just placating someone. And this is followed up by compensation and whether or not we need to change the behavior. If someone is distancing themselves or constantly disrespecting you, and if there's no change in behavior or no making it up to you, then it's going to be a repeated behavioral problem, and it's probably not going to be a healthy relationship. Please review the learning objectives for this chapter. You will need to understand the various reasons for entering into personal relationships. I also want you to recognize the stages and the dialectical tensions typically experienced in interpersonal relationships. Please also identify specific skills communicators can use to maintain and improve their interpersonal relationships. And finally, review the effects of social media on relationships. That's it for this lecture, guys. I hope you are doing well. Take care.